Welcome to a Bible talk from Lower Mountains Anglican Church.
Why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up, and the rulers band together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, "Let us break their chains and throw off their shackles." The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. He rebukes them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath, saying, "I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will proclaim the Lord's decree. He said to me, 'You are my son. Today I have become your father.' Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with the rod of iron. You will dash them to pieces like pottery. Therefore, you kings, be wise. Be warned, you rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and celebrate his rule with trembling. Kiss his son, or he will be angry, and your way will lead to your destruction, for his wrath can flare up in a moment. Blessed are all who take refuge in him."
Our second Bible reading will be from Matthew chapter 26, verses 1 to 16. Just for context, where you find the passage, in the previous two chapters, Jesus has been teaching on the end times and the return of the Son of Man and the judgment to come. Starting at chapter 26, verse 1. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. While Jesus was in Bethany in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he was reclining at the table. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. "Why this waste?" they asked. "This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor." Aware of this, Jesus said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly I tell you, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over.
Have you ever wondered what it might be like to be in a serious emergency? A very serious emergency? Some of you perhaps don't have to wonder, you know, but for most of us it's unlikely that we will be in such a situation, and that's a really good thing. We are unlikely to need to use one of these. These break glass emergency buttons are in a lot of places. I wonder if you've ever had to use one. Anybody ever had to use one of these? No? Zero. Oh, one. One. Right. There you go. That's the only one today that I have heard. Obviously, the glass on there is meant to prevent you from, setting off a false alarm, and yet it also allows you to access it when you really, really need to. But it also means that if you're going to activate the alarm, well, you kind of have to be committed to it. You have to be wanting to do this and really ready to do this. You've got to believe that this situation is urgent and serious enough to break the glass. Well, as you have probably heard, we are back into Matthew's Gospel, the last part as we head into Easter. We stopped last year, sometime in Matthew, and we're heading into, in the story, well, a bit of an emergency situation, a situation that is urgent and serious. a threat, one that requires an urgent and serious response, and we need to be ready to break the glass. It's been a while, like I said, since we've been there, but even within this gospel, it's been a while since the whole story was moving forward. As Toby gave us some context before, the story itself paused at the end of chapter 23. Jesus pronounced on the house of Israel, that's all the religious leadership of the temple, that they were desolate, defunct, completely redundant. They no longer deserved the place that they had. They no longer need. What he was going to do was going to completely replace them. In chapter 24 and 25, Jesus shared with his disciples a whole bunch of teaching about his coming. That is, his coming death, his coming to the Father as the glorified one, his coming to us as the risen King. And this message was about being ready, watching, being active and attentive. And so Matthew is restarting the storyline after this 2 chapters of just Jesus talking. He's restarting the storyline, the narrative, and he's taking us back to the future, a future that is more imminent than we might have been prepared for. In verse 2 he says, "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." It's meant to jolt us back into the story, back into the present, but also force upon us the future that is only days away for these disciples. Jesus is on a trajectory, a timeline that is driven by his Father's plan. And Jesus senses that the Passover will probably be the moment. A festival in the life of God's people, the nation of Israel, that looks back at the salvation that came to them in Egypt through God's intervention. It'll become the setting for the salvation of people from all nations. When Jesus is crucified as the one who saves us from our sins, the moment is urgent and important. But immediately Matthew then takes us behind the scenes to a back room of the temple palace of the high priest Caiaphas, where the priest and the elders, those who Jesus has previously condemned, scheme and plot their own condemnation of Jesus. They've had enough of his teaching and they want him arrested and killed. But they say not during the festival, not during the Passover festival, or there may be a riot among the people. You see, the leaders might want him dead, but their power is somewhat limited. And so while they're decided and determined and waiting for their moment, they need the right time and the right place. But just as this story gets going again, there's another pause in the action. We're taken away from the palace of the high priest in Jerusalem to Bethany and the home of a man known only as Simon the leper. From the inner sanctum of the most exclusive club in town to the home of a man named through his namesake is also his status. He's a complete outcast. Who this man is, we don't know exactly. Was he someone that Jesus healed? Maybe. The only thing we see is the contrast. The people in the center who hate Jesus and want him dead, and the people on the very outer fringes who welcome the very Son of God into their midst. And into this house comes a woman, unexpected and unnamed. But her actions in this night will become known throughout history. A woman came to him in verse 7 with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he was reclining on the table. An alabaster jar is a very expensive container that contains a very expensive perfume. You opened it by breaking the long neck of the bottle. Of the jar. It's a single-use item, and you poured the contents out. And for some reason, this woman knows that now is the time to open it. This is the urgent, important moment to literally break the glass. And in the room full of probably smelly men, the delicate and prized perfume fills the air. And out of their, but as soon as the aroma enters their noses, out of their mouths comes judgment and condemnation. The disciples saw this in verse 8, and they were indignant. Why this waste, they asked. This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. Now, I recently bought some perfume for my wife for her birthday, and I bought the good stuff, the real deal, Chanel No. 5. All right? And let me tell you, it's good. It's a beautiful perfume, but it ain't cheap. It is at the top end. Now, for these disciples, this is an unnecessary extravagance. It's a complete waste. They know how much good perfume costs. So do I. And this is too much. Surely it could have been put to much better use. But Jesus will have none of what they've said, what they're complaining about. Aware of this, Jesus said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She's done a beautiful thing to me." Jesus pushes back against the disciples. There will always be a time and an opportunity to help the poor, but they will not always have Jesus with them. This urgent and important moment is rightly acknowledged by this woman, so they can put aside their pretend piety. This is not a waste. This is a beautiful thing. But we need to ask, what is it that makes this beautiful? What is it that makes this beautiful? Take a moment and talk to the person next to you. What is it that makes what this woman has done beautiful? I'll give you 15 seconds. What is it that makes it beautiful? All right, that'll be about 15. That'll be about 15 seconds. What is it that makes someone's act of devotion a beautiful thing in Jesus' eyes? Because, look, people do all sorts of extraordinary things that seem like devotion to God. Is it because the perfume was expensive? Did anyone say that? Is it because the perfume was expensive? Because then I have a question, what is expensive? And you know, how expensive does it mean to be? Are we talking a price point here? I mean, was it Chanel or was it just Hugo Boss? And what if she got it on sale? You know, there's another question. There are some people who do extraordinary, extravagant things to show their love to God, their devotion to Him. Like this church in the US that built this massive 75-meter cross. It cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Is that a beautiful thing in Jesus' eyes? A couple of people have built a life-size Noah's Ark. You'd be surprised at how many life-size Noah's Arks there are around the world. Quite a few. Or you could spend a ton of money on a magnificent gold cross pendant. They're really popular right now too, but would Jesus say that is a beautiful thing? The key is in what Jesus says about this woman's act, what He says next. It's not just something that she does because she wants to do it for her own sake, she wants to express herself, but because of what it says about Jesus and what He came to do. Have a look at verse 12. He says, "When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for my burial." This act of devotion wasn't simply a random act on her part about her devotion, but it was her way of honoring the salvation that Jesus was about to bring. It was about Him. It prepared Jesus' body for burial. It proclaimed His coming death on behalf of sinners as a substitute for us. Jesus was to die in our place, so that we could be forgiven for our sins. This woman acknowledges that. She points to that. She proclaims that through her actions. It recognizes the glory of the one and only Son of God. And Jesus says such proclamation will continue, will go on. Truly, I tell you, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. You see, his words look beyond his death to a time when the gospel, the good news, will be preached. The message of his death and resurrection, the message of his victory over death and the forgiveness of sins, and her example of devotion will be preached also as we fulfill that word tonight. So beautiful, extravagant devotion to Jesus proclaims the truth about Jesus, even at great cost. It is recognizing in the moment the importance of Jesus, the urgency of the action required, and even if it might make you vulnerable, she was vulnerable in there in that room full of smelly men, the disciples. It might bring ridicule even from those who should know better, but it will be recognized by Jesus as beautiful. And it will be something that lasts because it proclaims the eternal truth. It is a beautiful thing when someone recognizes that others need to know about Jesus. And though it costs them greatly, they seek to tell others about him. Some people have given up promising careers to go and tell people about Jesus. Some people give up the comforts of their home country and culture to become foreigners in a land that does not know Jesus, so that they might proclaim the gospel there. Some people risk friendships and popularity to be clear that they love Jesus, that they trust him, that they obey him. This is a beautiful thing in Jesus' eyes. Some people pray for friends to know Jesus and devote themselves to asking them to join them at church or seek ways to engage them in a conversation about Jesus. There will be many ways to beautifully show your devotion to Jesus. Some will feel so vulnerable and so scared that they will worry about rejection or looking silly as they sum up the courage to pull out the Easter invitation and hand it to that friend or cousin or work colleague and ask them to join them at church this Easter. That is a beautiful thing. Now, thinking back to emergencies, there are a number of ways we might respond. Confronted with a serious and urgent situation, people react differently. Some people might indeed recognize the moment and break the glass and sound the alarm, and lots of people might be saved. Some might panic and scream and run. Others might be completely frozen in fear and paralyzed. I always like to think about how I might respond, but when you're put in the moment, you're probably not going to be like the hero in the movies. There is another way that some might respond when they see an emergency, an important and urgent moment. But the way they respond is to see an opportunity for themselves. Instead of breaking the glass, sounding the alarm, they grab what they can for themselves. Looting is what we might call it in most instances. But it happens even during, it's one of the lowest ways to respond, but it happens even during the moments that we see here in Matthew's Gospel. Judas is one of the disciples, but he's not ignorant. He sees what is coming. He has heard Jesus speak about his coming death, just as the woman has. And what he recognizes is an opportunity to cash out early. He sees what is about to happen to Jesus. He grabs what he can for himself. He loots. Verse 14, and one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" The problem we left hanging at the palace of the high priest might now have a solution. There could be a way to arrest Jesus sooner than they thought, if Judas can give them a quiet place to carry out their scheme. But it wasn't the chief priests who said, "We need to get an inside man, let's see who we can grab." They didn't track down Judas. No, Judas goes to them with his own scheme. While the woman we saw was willing to give so much to Jesus, Judas asked the chief priest, "What are you willing to give me?" A moment ago, he was among the disciples decrying the wasted perfume and piously suggesting that it be given to the poor. Now he seeks to line his own pockets. And what they're willing to give is 30 pieces of silver. Some say this was the price for a slave. Some say it refers to a prophecy in the Old Testament, in the prophet Zechariah, who speaks of a rejected shepherd and who was paid a paltry 30 silver coins for his work. And Matthew will have more to say about that later on in the gospel. But even if these are in the background, it's what's in the foreground that's far more obvious. Judas has rejected Jesus. He's rejected what he came to do. He either thinks that Jesus is just a man and, well, his death is just like any other death. It's not particularly special. Or if he thinks he really is the Son of God, he doesn't see the value in the salvation that Jesus seeks to bring. And so Judas does the next logical thing. He cashes out. He seeks to get what he can now before it's too late. His interest in knowing Jesus is only what Jesus can do for him now. His interest is not in what Jesus promises to do, not in what Jesus needs to do for Judas and for all people. He only wants to get what he can get now out of Jesus. It's really easy to condemn Judas as some devilishly evil dude. You know, the worst of the worst. I mean, he's betraying the Son of God into the hands of men. That's pretty bad. It's easy to see him as so, other, so different. This kind of symbol of betrayal that's so far away from us. But the frightening thing about Judas is that it is so easy to be exactly like him. Now, sure, you're not going to be setting Jesus up to be arrested by a mob. But we can so easily come to Jesus with the attitude of, what are you willing to give me now? What can I get out of this now? Not what does Jesus promise me through faith in him, but what can he do for me now, the things that I want. I mean things like, can Jesus make me look moral, like a good person? Can I use my association with Jesus to make people think that I'm trustworthy, I'm a nice person? Maybe saying I'm a Christian will get my kids into a good school, or maybe, it'll get me a good discount on school fees. Probably shouldn't have gone there. Maybe I can pretend to trust Jesus, and that might help me get a boyfriend or a girlfriend. And I've heard people state that almost exactly in those terms. That happens a lot. It could be so easy to be just like Judas. If Jesus is just an interesting teacher with, loads of wisdom, that can be just like Judas too. I mean, there is a rising interest in Jesus in our shifting culture of Western society, particularly among young men. But a lot of it is about what Jesus can do for me, what he can teach me, what he can help me with, how he can help me, grow as a person and be successful and be intentional and get things done. It's good to see people having an interest in Jesus, but following him is more than just learning about him. It's much more costly. It's much more vulnerable. It's much more beautiful. It's never cashing out on Jesus. It's throwing everything in with him. So perhaps we need to ask, what is my personal interest in Jesus? Is it to please someone? Is it to please the crowd that I'm among? Is it to please my family, my parents? Is it so that I can just be associated with the good people or the people I like? Is it because Christianity will help me get places? Or is it because Jesus really is the Son of God? That you really do need his salvation, that his body was laid down on the cross to pay for your sins, and you are willing to lay down your life in service of him. Because we need to ask ourselves, have we recognized the moment, this hour of urgency and importance? Jesus has died and risen again. He's coming again. He'll return in judgment for all those who have rejected him, and salvation to all those who have trusted him. Have you recognized that this may be the moment to break the glass? Or if, like Judas, we're only in this for ourselves, cashing out on Jesus rather than honoring him, we should only ever expect the measly sum that will not last. That if, like this woman that we saw who anointed Jesus with her radical, extravagant devotion, we value and honor Jesus in all our life, if we seek his gospel, his kingdom, his righteousness, we will find not simply what we want now, but eternal joy. The good news of his victory over sin and death, and a place with him in the world to come. So this is the moment that we now find ourselves in. A moment of great urgency and importance. Jesus has died. Jesus has risen. He has ascended and will sometime, anytime, return again to judge the living and the dead, condemn those who have rejected him, commend those who receive him and have put their trust in him. And so it is time to ask yourself this question: am I willing to break the glass?
You have been listening to a Bible talk from Lower Mountains Anglican Church. If you'd like to know more about Jesus, get further information, or download other resources, please visit our website at lmap.org.au.